In the previous film, Bill and Mike shared some history behind the Richmond, how she ended up on the bottom, and the methods they used to locate her. This year, attempting to more accurately locate and document key features of the wreck, they have devised new control points to place around the perimeter of the wreck. Once in position, these control points will aid Bill and Mike in trilaterating key components and features of the wreck. Placing these control points could take the entire season, but the CSS Richmond doesn't mind. She's been waiting a little over 157 years to share some of her secrets. So what type of control point did Bill design for this purpose?
Thank goodness. That's 40 out of 40. So at the end of last year's season, we were finding that maybe using just a PVC pipe 3 or 4 foot long and driving it into the bottom wasn't really the answer. It was hard to drive it in, and even after you've driven it in, you could just pick it straight out, which meant that any tree that floated down the river would knock it over, pull it out, snag the string. It just wasn't working out too well for us. So we decided that before the season was out, I wanted to try an experiment. So that experiment involved getting some wheel rotors, which are heavy. This is 20 pounds. You can get them for free. The auto shops just throw them away. So you take and get a disc, mount it on the rotor, and then get a 3/4 inch PVC male adapter. It's threaded to go through the disc, and you can insert a PVC pipe on the top end. So the reason that you want that is because you can get another fitting and glue it on this end. You've got it beveled to go into the bottom easy. And what you do is you screw this in on the underside. Once you've done that, you would take this, you've got your spot picked out on the bottom, you've probed, you know where the edge of the wreck is. So you take this, you pull the probe out, and you put this in there, and you just work this right into the mud, sand, clay, whatever, until you're on the bottom. And the next step would be to take a PVC pipe and put it in the upper end. You just go in there hand tight. That's good enough. It's not going to go anywhere. And then you have to plumb it. It has to be perfectly plumb, or it can throw your compasses off. Then you can use it for a control point using these compasses. I call them a trilaterator because you're trilaterating distances to various features on the wreck. Another thing that you want to do, and this is just so you know where you're at, is you have these little copper plates, discs that I have made up that have a number stamped into them. In this case, it's number 4, and the H at the bottom is for Henrico. So you know that if you just come across the wreck, you'll know, okay, I'm at pole number 4, and I'm on the Henrico side. Instantly, you're oriented. So you can have these tied to these rope ears, and that's also where you run a string from rotor to rotor along one side of the ship. And if one gets pulled over, something happens to it, all you got to do is find one, you can find the rest. So it's a good reference. Now at the end of the season, when you're done, you wouldn't want this sticking up because it's a snag for everything floating down the river. And there's a lot of stuff that floats down that river. So you just wiggle this around, she'll come on out, and you take this little cap and you put it in there. It keeps mud and sand from getting in there, and you just leave that in there. You got this low profile. Nothing is going to move this rotor. It's attached by string one to another. It's down in the bottom. Suction plus the weight of the item itself. These things weigh about 20 pounds a piece, the ones that we've used. So you'll be good to go until the next season, and you can use them again and again and again. For those of you who haven't seen our prior presentations or video, I think you need to understand a few things about the wreck before we can go forward with what we're doing. Now, what I want to show you is this ship is upside down in the middle of the channel, not right side up. So we're working from the underside of everything. So last year, we began putting poles around the perimeter of the wreck, spaced 10 feet apart. We were just driving 3/4-inch PVC into the bottom to mark it and running string between them. But over a winter, with flooding and whatnot, even though we drove them close to the bottom, still some of them were pulled out and some of them were leaned over, and we decided we need to do something more permanent. So what we're going to attempt to do this summer is that we are going to take a wheel rotor assembly and place them along the perimeter of the wreck to define it and to establish control points. When we're telling people about the size of this wreck, and you're telling them it's 172 feet, give or take, and 40-some feet wide, it's just a number. You know, can you really picture how large that is? And Mike and I, when we're telling people about this, it's just the two of us basically on the river bottom mapping this out. It's hard to grasp the enormity of this wreck. So what we've decided to do is to lay out in a field the exact dimensions of this wreck so that you can visually see just how huge it is. So we're going to begin today out there in the field by pulling a line straight down the center and setting the distance at 172 feet. Then we're going to use the rotors without the spike on the bottom at 10-foot intervals along that center line. After we've done that, we're going to set the trilaterator, the compass, on that pole, just like we would do on the bottom if we're measuring something. And then we're going to pull it out. We'll set it at 0 and 180, so it's in line, and use a swing arm to go the distance out that this is scaled to be. Each place, all the way down the length of the wreck. And then hopefully you can visually see just how small we are and how big this ship is. All right, everyone, we're set up here in the field now. I have established the 0 point, and I will be pulling this tape line out 172 foot and marking that end as well. And you will be able to see just how long the CSS Richmond is. So that's 172 feet. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull a rope through here, pull it taut, and start going in 10-foot intervals and establishing the outline of the wreck. Okay, so we're going down the line, putting these down right on center line every 10 feet. Okay, so this is the last pin that I need to put down, so we have a total of 172 foot long. All right. Now that we have finished establishing the center line and we've marked it with ribbon and a nail every 10 foot all the way down, I'm gonna begin placing these rotors dead over top of that, inserting the pole, the compass, and pulling the tape line out 90 degrees that way, 90 degrees this way. And I'll be using the dimensions on this table right here so that I know how far to go, and it's by scale of what's on the drawing. Alright, so I'm going to take the rotor, I'm going to line it up, I'll go right through the hole and see the center, set it on center, put my pole in position, set my compass on the pole, set it for 0 and 180, tighten the knob so it doesn't move, and then I'm going to pull this out to the first distance. It's 5 foot 8.5 each way. So now I'm going to ensure that I'm on 270 degrees, and I'm right there, and the distance is 5 foot 8.5. I'm going to put this nail right dead center on that, and then I'm going to go the exact same difference at 90 degrees. And set this thing up same as we did before. I am going to go halfway between there, and I am right there, and 5 foot 8.5, and that's where we have the pin. And so from here on out, we'll just do the same thing every 10 feet, but we'll use the new dimension, which it's going to get wider and wider and wider until it gets near the middle, and then it's going to start taping in. But the process is the same all the way down. Now that we have everything in place that marks the perimeter of the wreck, it's time to put the rotors on there, the poles, and we will do the same thing at every position until we've gone all the way around the wreck. So you sight it on that nail, you put it right there, and then you put your pole here, and you have one control point set up, just like we will on the actual wreck. Now that we have every control point in position, I'm going to take the surveyor's tape and I'm going to go from pole to pole along the perimeter all the way around so that you can see the outline from down on the ground as well as up above. Now that we have lined the entire perimeter, it's time for us to see what this looks like from the ground as well as up above. now that we've established all the control points and established the relationship from pole to pole so that we know the exact position of every one of these poles in relation to one another and the other side, we can begin measuring objects that are found on the wreck. So what we have over here is a simulation of a piece of iron armor that's 8 inches wide, about 8 foot long, 2 inches thick. And we want to position it on our master drawing. So you do that by setting up these compasses, and the measurements are taken from dead on center to corners. So that's what we're going to do here. Now, because this is a straight object, we know the length of it, you know the width of it. All you got to do is get one corner on each side, and then you can draw it in. So, going from pole number 10, we have 17 feet 1/8 inch. And then pulling this tape over, careful on what side of the tape you're reading from, 17 foot 8 3/4. So now we've got that tied in. You can swing an arc, and you know where that corner is. Now we got to go to the other end. So what we have from pole 10 is 20 foot 3 1/4. And from pole 8, we have 11 feet. So that right there gives us the trilateral position of that corner. Now we can swing arcs, establish that corner. We know the width, know the length. Got it.
During the summer months, Bill and Mike attempt to work on the Richmond at least once a week. Each day Bill and Mike go out. The routine is always the same, almost automatic. Get up early, drive to the ramp, place the gear on the boat, place the boat in the water, get to the dive site, and dive. Anyone who doesn't like getting wet may want to reconsider their career choice. It's a team effort, and everyone pitches in. Precautions are taken to protect the deck. The launch alignment could have been a bit better. Next time, Mike may want a longer dock line. Personal gear is stowed last. Before they depart, Bill demonstrates the lowering process for the rotors.
Okay, so the way we get these in the water is that we take 2 rotors and pretty much put them back to back. I'll take this rope here, run it through where the pole normally goes. Run it through the other one. And then I pull it so that the hook that will carry the weight is on top. Then I tie it with a good snug square knot, which is easy for me to undo, but the more you pull on it, the tighter it gets. Then Taft is snapping the lift bucket on there, and so once he attaches the down line, which is long enough for me to, he holds it when I need him to, but otherwise it just goes on down the line with him feeding it to me. So, all right, he cleats it off so that I can literally just drop it. And those rotors are about 18 pounds a piece, so you got more flotation, which is great. I just tilt the bucket when I want it to go down, but at 34 feet down, which is the depth, that air is going to be half its volume by the time it gets there. So if I need to add air, I just put my regulator under the bucket, puts air in it. If I got too much, I just tilt it and dump it. So it's a perfect way to get them down.
The crew pushes off, and today's mission begins. Bill pilots his boat upriver. It's a trip he's made 100 times before. The goal for today is simple. Stage another 10 rotors on the bottom for future positioning on the wreck. Today's work is the easy part. Placing these markers in their final position will be the real challenge. From an elevated position, you've just got to ask yourself, how much history actually lies on the bottom of the James?
Yesterday's dive went really well. Using this new method to lower rotors to the bottom made that whole process go much faster and smoother. We took the rotors down to the bottom and put them in basically a pile so we could get to them easy and move them around where they needed to be. Once that was done, then it was time to establish our center line. And the center line would run from beam plus one, which is a main beam. It is upriver, probably near the middle of the ship. And there's a pillar plate on it where the main post would be to support the deck at that point. So we attached the rope there, pulled it downriver all the way to what we call a compass pole, which is a pole that is set on the center line beam downriver. The distance between the two is about 58 foot 3 inches from one end to the other. So that was long enough, and we tied it off as tight as we could get it. Then I took a tape line and attached it to this compass pole and pulled it all the way upriver and tied it off tight at beam plus one. With that done, it was time to go and get the rotors and set them along that center line to hold the line in place, to keep it on center. And as I set each one, just as I did in the field, I put those rotors down every 10 feet. I could look through the middle of it and see well enough that I was on that rope at 10-foot increments, all the way up to beam plus one, which from the compass pole is essentially 58 feet. Once that was accomplished, it was time to put the PVC pipe in it so we could install the compass on there. So I took the compass and put it on the first position. I set it at 0 degrees upriver, 180 degrees downriver. And because we were going to the Chesterfield side, that would be 270 degrees, would give us a perpendicular line going from the center line. Having done that on the first position, I pretty quickly was able to pull it straight out beyond where I felt the edge was and probe out from the center. And round about 11 foot 4, it began to drop off wood into clay, gravel, and so forth. So to verify it, I probed all around there, and I found that that was in fact the edge. So I would get another rotor and take it out there with the stub on the bottom so it would move laterally. I would put another PVC pipe on the top of it so that we could put a compass on it later. And I pushed it down into the bottom, used my level to make it perfectly plumb and vertical. Then it had rope ears on it for me to attach a mason's line to so that you could, when everything was done, go from pole to pole. On this first day, with all that we had to do, we felt like we accomplished a lot by getting 2 positions finished. And there are others that were done previous, but they needed to be verified using this method. And we believe that they're going to be pretty much where they're shown at the distance on this drawing. On yesterday's dive, we were able to do all of that, get the rotors on the bottom, run the lines, and start using our method to determine where the edge of the wreck was. Got 2 positions done. In future dives, the next trip out, we want to continue on up the Chesterfield side and place those rotors on the edge of the wreck and define the perimeter of the wreck on that side.
Today's goal: capture some underwater footage of the control points that have already been positioned on the wreck.
The new eye-bolt mooring and set up rotor assembly for filming. I'll be on the bottom doing that while you're motoring over. When you see that new eye-bolt
Bill and I
mooring come up, you're
review
gonna
the
see
task
that
necessary to achieve today's goals.
if you want. But when you see that other one, I want you to go on around there and call me when you are hooked up. And because we got little or no current, pull it up tight. Is that clear?
Yep, everything's clear. As planned, Bill moved out to the wreck and raised a surface marker, to which I attached the boat. He then took the camera down in an attempt to get some footage of him placing one of the control points on the wreck. The conditions are less than ideal. Unfortunately, Bill and Mike faced these conditions on each and every dive. Bill forces the control point into the bottom, twisting and shifting until it's settled. He then ensures that it is plumb. Bill surfaces and describes the difficulties in filming the task. Before boarding the boat, Bill wants to lower 2 more rotors to the bottom for later positioning. After staging the rotors on the bottom, Bill surfaces for a short break. He swaps out his tank, dons his gear, and re-enters the water. Immediately upon entry, we receive a call providing a status report of a barge that is due to head towards our position.
He's in the water, not under yet. I take it you must be heading up the river or down the river? Are you heading this way yet?
Fortunately for us, it would be 2 hours before the barge reaches our position.
Okay, all right, okay. Well, we just wanted to make sure that you weren't heading down. He said it's going to be 2 hours maybe, and that he'll call us before they leave and call us at Drury's Bluff. Okay? All right.
On the bottom, Bill locates the compass pole and runs up the center line to beam +1. Along the way, he passes one of the control points that has been spaced at 10-foot intervals. The pink line connects the perimeter control points. These control points are tagged, which will aid Bill and Mike in determining their position on the wreck, even in poor visibility. Each tag is numbered and shaped to identify the position on the wreck. A round tag identifies the Chesterfield side of the wreck. A square tag identifies the Henrico side. The line ends at this control point, and just beyond it lies a sunken tree blocking the path to the next control point. Obstacles like this are a common occurrence for Bill and Mike to overcome. Each year, the James River provides a new challenge for these two divers. Bill shifts over and starts back down the Henrico County side. The tag is square identifying the Henrico County side and is marked as control point number 7. As Bill moves down the line, the all too familiar sound of boat traffic can be heard above. This next tag is control point number 8. Bill continues down the line until his dive is completed. Dive operations are secured, all equipment is stowed, and the last task is to sink the surface markers. While returning to the ramp, Bill shares his plans for the next dive.
So you've all seen how this ironclad looked laid out in a field, full size, in perfect conditions, nothing in the way. And so when you get on the river bottom, you find out it's not as easy as it is on land. There are trees in the way. There are stumps in the way. Features on the wreck that are sticking up in your way. It's not as easy to lay it out as we did in that field. So what you have to do is modify your method. And in this drawing here, you can see how we began to do that. This really doesn't look like it did in the field, does it? No, not by a long shot. What you're looking at is the reality. What we had in the field was in a perfect world. Well, on the river bottom, it's not a perfect world. There are so many things in your way that we had to modify our plan to suit the circumstances. So this is where we began this year. Last year, poles were placed here, just a pole, about 40 inches long. So we determined that wasn't the way to go, so now we got to replace it with rotors. Mike went back at the beginning of this year with the rotors and began double checking that we were on the edge. It's very easy to find the edge over here because it's not very far under the river bottom. The current washes against this side, and so it's not very far under. So it's fairly easy to find it. So a rotor was placed at each one of these positions along the perimeter of the wreck. Some are in. Why? Is that wreckage in the process of salvaging it? Did it get torn away? We don't really know. All I can tell you is that's where we found no wood or iron. For myself, I started over here, and we were going by a center point right off the drawing here. It's on a pillar plate that's in the center of beam +1. It's a prominent feature on the wreck, and we pulled a line tight all the way down through right here. And so I started right there and went every 10 foot on that line and put a rotor. That line is tight. I placed a rotor and then started probing out from each one until I went from hitting wood, and then it would drop off the edge. And sometimes you would even feel the armor on the outside as it scraped across it, and then there would be nothing. So that worked very well until we got down here to where a feature on Gordon Watts's drawing called Feature K, it seems to be a part of the knuckle, was right in our way. So I couldn't accurately go off that line anymore. So what I decided to do was to put my measuring tape here, pull it out across here. I'd take that distance and double it and go on out here. As soon as it was tangent, I'd begin probing in and out because I figured it should be coming in, but I'm looking for an edge, and this is where I would hit an edge. There would be nothing beyond here, so I would put a rotor. I'd do the same thing, pull that line tangent, double the distance, and I'd be out here, nothing. I had nothing either way. And then I started coming in until I started hitting. I go in and work my way back until I found that edge. I go to each side. And so that's pretty much how we got all the way down to here. When we got to this point here, which is down near the pointed end of the wreck, it was just random. It was too random and scattered. And so I'm under the impression, or we are under the impression, that it was broken up. It wasn't that thick. It wasn't that long. And when they pulled whatever's at that end up, it probably broke it up. So how did we come up with the shape? All I've got is a bunch of rotors on the bottom, and I can't see any further than this. How do I come up with what this looked like? This next drawing will show you what we had to go through to develop it and come up with this drawing. So we have all these points, rotor positions, all around what we feel is the perimeter of the wreck. But what does it look like? And there's only one way to make that determination, and that is by the use of trilateration from one point to another. And to show you what I did in developing that, I'll have to show you this next drawing. Okay, so we have all these rotor positions. We've got them plumb level. So where do you begin to put this on paper and develop it so that you can tell what this thing's shape truly is? So where I began was putting numbered copper tags. Mike and I went to a lot of trouble to have these copper tags in place with a number and an alphabetic letter to represent the Henrico side. So this right here, for instance, is 6H because it's on the Henrico side and it's the sixth pole from where we had started. 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, and so on down to here, which is 15. And over here, copper tags numbered 6C for Chesterfield, 7, 8, 9, 10, all the way down here to 13. Okay, now when I'm taking measurements, I've got a number reference so that I can keep it all straight to begin to draw it out. So, as I said, you're measuring between each pole along the perimeter. If a pole is in, you have to move the tape line in. Over here, it's the same thing. So we know exactly the distance between each point here. And now you need to know what these distances are here to trilaterate and begin to develop the entire site. So each one of these represents a triangle. I would pull the tape line tight. It would be level, and the poles on each end would be perfectly vertical when I took that dimension, and the same is true for each one. Here's a triangle right here. Now I can take and put a point down and develop that triangle. All right, I'm ready for the next one. I have measured these distances from this pole to this pole here. I have a slate that has the fill-in blanks so that I can keep straight on my head on the river bottom. So one triangle after another, from point to point and across, measuring those distances all the way down. And by the time you get down here, you're talking 52 feet across. I might have to swim that distance 4 or 5 times to get it level, to make sure it's not snagged on anything. There's a lot of swimming and it's a lot of work. But this is what the developing, taking those dimensions and developing this drawing, this is what we have. So now that we've established all these triangles and connected all the points, we can see now on paper what this wreck truly looks like. Now that we've completed all of this, I think it can be said that it certainly doesn't look like what we had laid out in the field. But nothing's lost here. Every one of these points is fixed and set, measured, and can be used in the future by us and others to establish the position of things within the wreck and without the wreck from here on out.
Today could be the last day of the season for these two to work on the Richmond. This could be the last opportunity to get their thoughts on how the work has progressed.
We're out here today trying to finish up what we can practically get this season. What the progress we've made is we have put down the rotors. We put down 9 of them on the Chesterfield side from just a little above the center line all the way down river to close to where the pointed end should be. And that's just the Chesterfield side.
And we've put down 10 rotors on the Henrico side, removed the old positioning poles, and on our last dive, we'll pull up all of our old materials for the season.
And, I think the reason that we've designed these rotor assemblies the way we have is so that when these floods come down the river, like they do once hurricane season begins, or over the winter in particular, there is so much stuff that floats down this river, we have to be able to remove that top pole and put a cap in it so it doesn't fill with mud and whatnot. They're attached one to another by the string, so if it does get covered, we can find them again. So unlike the system we had before, this is going to work a lot better for that.
You're absolutely right, Bill. I mean, we've had logs and debris knock out a long string of those positioning poles before. Fortunately, this year we won't have this problem because those rotors don't have the pipes in them. And at the end of our dive this season, we'll go down and cap those things off.
And once that's done, I think that what would be so cool to do is now that you've got the site plan, you know where the perimeter is, you've got all your control points established, then you can begin using the trilaterators to triangulate key features within the wreck. Because just to see it and map the feature itself, you've got to be able to place it within the site plan for it all to make sense and to progress.
I think next year, for the short-term goals, is we need to finish putting down the positioning poles and control points and defining the entire perimeter of the wreckage of the ship.
To your point, Mike, that's when the fun stuff really begins. I mean, establishing this perimeter, that's been hard work. It's taken an entire season. So now we get to focus on what's within that perimeter. And we do that by, we've mapped in all the control points. Now we use our compasses to trilaterate the features that are within the wreck. Before we made drawings of certain areas. Now we can tie it into the master site plan. And then it's all going to begin to come together, one piece at a time. Yeah, when people find out we've been doing this for essentially 12 years, one of the questions we're asked is, in 12 years, what all have you accomplished? Well, what they don't realize is that we only do this in the summertime. And so in the summer, we get in typically 12 diving days. That's it. And then those are interrupted by electrical storms, storms that just pop up. Maybe you have some flooding. That can make the visibility so bad you can hardly accomplish anything. It's a good day when you can read your gauges. And even worse than that is tugboat traffic. Richmond is a fairly busy port, and we have tugboats coming by constantly. So yeah, it's not like we just have endless time and everything's just perfect, because out here, it's not.
But we've discovered an awful lot. We've made some significant finds in our 12 years here. We've taken a 10 by 15 square foot site, and over 10 years we've made it into a 172 foot by 50 foot site. And contained within that site, we found a knuckle originally discovered by Gordon Watts. We found steam pipe. We have found iron plate. We found the edge of the casemate. And there's no telling what's still down there. This wreckage could be a giant box of antiquities. And Bill, our goal remains the same. The same goal we established in 2010, and now these 12 years later. We want to educate Virginians as to the fact that the sister ship of the Virginia, CSS Richmond, lies in 40 feet of water 8 miles down from Richmond, and that there's no telling what treasures she may still hold within her.
And speaking of things that are constantly interrupting us and keeping us from getting more time on, here comes one right now.
Two, actually.
Yeah, or several. Boaters that think a dive flag means circle here for hours or pass close by. And the tugboat is one of Intercoastal Marine's tugboats. It is the Ranger, a frequent visitor to the city of Richmond. You do not want to be under that thing when it goes over. If you've got kidney stones, it's better than lithotripsy because it goes right through you.
Now that the danger has passed, it is now safe to resume diving operations on the Richmond. Bill will move out to the Richmond and send up the mooring buoy. Then, the boat will be repositioned for the remainder of today's operation. Bill will not surface, but he will continue placing control points on the Richmond. The boat has been repositioned, and Mike gears up for his next
There
dive.
should be a ring of round brass tags that are numbered, and I need the number 3.
On this dive, Mike plans on setting the number 3 checkpoint on the Chesterfield side.
So big. Perfect. All right.
The two surface at the end of their dives and immediately start swiping out their tanks.
I mean, I'm serious. I believe if I were you, I'd go out there to center line, get that rotor,
Bring it down to
come
5.
come back over here, and you're going to go to 4 and 3. Where are you now? 3 or 2?
The new position would be 2.
Are they coming in? Looked like they were.
This one was just slightly off, but it could have been the tape too. But it was maybe 4 inches over toward this side. But it's metal. It's
All right, and you're probing out to nothing, gravel going in, wood.
yeah, tink off.
I also go off to the sides. Once I feel like, okay, this is
Yeah.
the center, I'll go up river and down river and do the same thing. And
Yeah.
if you're getting that, you're there.
Oh, no. Yeah, that's it.
It's late afternoon. The two want to complete their operations for the day and have the boat out of the water by sunset. This is the last dive of the day. Both divers enter the water, complete their work, surface, stow their gear, and get ready for the return trip back to the ramp. Over the last 2 months, these two have faced many challenges due to the bottom and surface conditions. However, their final goal remains the same. They hope to complete the placement of these control points by early next season. Could this be the last dive of the season? Perhaps not. If these two get the opportunity, I'm sure they'll return. With all the challenges these two have faced over a decade or more, what keeps driving them? Is it their dream to unravel the mysteries of the Richmond? Paulu Coelho once said, "There's only one thing that makes a dream impossible to achieve, the fear of failure." Neither of these two had the word failure in their vocabulary.